Sweet, we're live. Hello, everyone. How's it going? Welcome to another Octant live stream. Epoch 12 is in full force. We've had a bunch of live streams so far with a lot of amazing projects, and today is no different. We have a few others that have joined us to discuss how AI supercharges data analytics. And today I have Chandresh as my co-host. So super excited to have you. Hi, Chandresh.
Hi, Nico. Thank you for bringing me here. It's great to share the space with so many people. Uh, and yeah, we'll talk more about the AI today. But and GM to everyone who's watching us, stay tuned, and we'll say this right now and even at the end of this stream that please go vote on Epoch 12.
Cool. Thank you, Chandresh. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, of course, of course. So I work in marketing. Recently, I was working at Gnosis and Circles, and I mean, maybe some of you have heard about Circles. It's the social currency where everyone can create their own money. And then apart from that, I am also the lead organizer for ETHMumbai. We have hosted 2 hackathons, 1 conference, more than 20 meetups. We have been working with the DevCon team since last September, almost 10 months now, helping them throughout the city, looking for venues, ops, vendors, and cannot wait to host everyone, all the Ethereum community in Mumbai later this year. So yeah, that's about me.
Sweet. Thank you, Chandresh. And yeah, so I'm Nico. I'm the ecosystem lead at Octant. And as you know, we've launched Octant V2 with this new Epoch. So if you check it out, there's a fresh new UI. There's a lot of new mechanisms that you can use to vote. For example, the main one is that you don't no longer need to lock GLM in order to participate. You can just contribute ETH directly, which is super cool, a very requested feature. The way it works is with the ETH that you commit, half of it gets swapped to GLM and it gets burnt, and the other half is your voting power in the round. So that's how we sort of balance with the people who have locked for a few months in advance. And yeah, there are some amazing projects. Last week we did a demo day. If you are curious, each of them gave a 5-minute pitch. That was awesome. And now we're having deeper conversations with the projects in these live streams to understand where their heads at are with different topics that are relevant to them. So yeah, I'm super excited to introduce our guests today. We have Adi from L2Beat, we have Raymond from Open Source Observer, and Tobias from growthepie. Hi guys, how's it going?
Hello.
Hey, good to see you.
Hello.
Cool. So let's start with a quick round of intros. Please introduce yourself and the project you're representing. Adi, if you want to go first.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Adi from L2Beat. I'm a product management. So I've been there for the past 3 years. I'm also doing product management, but we're a small company, so I'm involved with a lot of things. And for those of you who don't know L2Beat, we're a research analytics company focused on making the Ethereum space more transparent. We started by showing how the different L2s compare. We mostly focus on risk analysis, more specifically counterparty risk analysis. But we also provide some useful metrics on the adoption, like the total value secured, activity, etc. But lately, we've also been expanding into other protocols that we think are important part of the on-chain infrastructure in the space. We introduced Interop, we previously had bridges, but the framework was a bit outdated. So I'm glad that we finally found the time to update this one to take into account the latest innovations. And the latest thing we introduced is privacy. As you know, privacy is a major topic, and it's something that the Ethereum Foundation also included in their mandate. So going forward, this is something that we'll be looking into, like how private really are of these solutions, and in which cases privacy might be lost. And yeah, I would say that people should visit L2Bit if they're wondering how the projects really work, and they would like to see if the marketing claims correspond to the on-chain reality.
Sweet, thank you, Adi. Raymond, do you want to go next?
Yeah, hi, I'm Raymond, one of the co-founders of Open Source Observer, abbreviated OSO. We are a AI-powered data platform for open source data. We kind of got our start in the optimism retrofunding world, starting with effectively one gigantic pipeline measuring the entire open source supply chain, from funding to developer activity to dependencies to on-chain usage. And since then, we've really transformed, and that's why I'm excited to be on this live stream. We've gone from one pipeline to an infinite sea of pipelines, and we're now trying to build a platform to make it easy to collaborate in an open source way on data problems. Our tagline internally has been indexing the universe, and we want to do that with open source principles. So excited to talk about how agents make that feasible in a time when we never really couldn't conceive this a couple years ago when we first started.
Yeah, excited to hear more about it as well. Toby, you want to go next?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Toby from growthepie, so one of the co-founders there. And it's great to be in this round, so in this Epoch, but also in this round here, because we basically work more or less with all the projects that are here. And that just shows like how collaborative we work in the data space, I think. So yeah, we are a data platform as well. We are roughly 3 years old now. And we also started with layer 2s. Back then, we wanted to cover more usage data around layer 2s. So we listed more and more. At peak times, we're at like 35. Now a bit less because, like as you might know, some also shut down. And but we started focusing more on apps as well. So covering app metrics to really show, okay, what can people actually use on the different chains, Ethereum mainnet and layer 2s. So where you can see, okay, what's the activity around, let's say different dexes or different games and so on, and basically exploring the whole Ethereum ecosystem. That's what we're focusing on. And for that, we also maintain a lot around the OSS directory because we kind of, we try to interlink things and kind of don't do the work twice. So basically when we do contract labeling and we discover a project or there's a new project that comes out, and we then add that to the OSS directory and basically then build our metrics on that as well. And so yeah, it's a lot around usage metrics in different chains in the Ethereum ecosystem and applications.
Thank you, Toby, and thank you everyone else. Great introductions, and let's get right into it. So we'll talk a lot about how AI is changing the platform, changing user behavior. But first question to all of you is, how is AI supercharging data analytics for your platform? So one by one, you can start. I think, Toby, we can start with you first for this round of questions.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different angles we can look at. I think what AI helps us. So on the one hand, obviously, it helps us to make our lives easier, our workflows much more efficient and faster. And on the other hand, I think we can also provide a lot more, let's say, customized data analytics and insights to end users. When you look at, when you go on Claude, for example, and then you look at different projects, and it can actually kind of then read our data and kind of make an analysis for you. So basically, all the front end that we built for you in the last 3 years, you can sometimes skip and kind of get an analysis through Claude or any other AI. But on the other hand, it just helps to be much faster. And we explored so much around how can we actually make our platform more readable. That's one of the things that we have been looking at in the last couple of months. So to really serve the data much better to LLMs, so that they can read the latest, maybe even like hourly data from our platform.
Yeah. By the way, I have to say it's working really well. I have been checking the AI summaries, suggested questions, asking questions on the platform, and it's really working well. So all the work that you put in, it's showing up on the front end. And yeah, great. Moving on to Raymond. So can you also talk about how it's working out for you?
Yeah, it's been, yeah. I don't want to be another one of those people just like touting the, how amazing AI is, but it really has completely transformed our business, and our, the way that we work on a day-to-day basis, across the board. When we started, like everybody else, we were just kind of users of it. So of course it would make, engineering, especially front end related things, much easier. And over the course of, I would say, less than 6 months, honestly, we've started exploring what it looks like when you start to give these tools to the users with the data in an intimate way. Because once you have clean data, the first thing we thought was, well, you can give like the users the ability to basically one-shot dashboards instantly. Like with clean data, that's actually very easy and very hard to get wrong, actually. Like there are a lot of engineering things that are difficult to get right, and you don't really trust the agent to do. When it's one-shotting dashboards, it's pretty good. So that was kind of where we started, was just like one-shotting notebooks. I would say in the last year, that went from something that was, kind of unfeasible, to poor quality, to incredible every time now, which has been a total transformation. Because I remember, I don't want to name products, but there were a handful of like big products that were trying to build like an agent analyst, and we really just weren't there in 2025. That has completely changed how we think about things when you can trust the results that come out of it. And so we started to identify other areas where AI can perform pretty well with some guardrails. Obviously you have to build the guardrails, but assuming you build the guardrails well, like, can we trust its outcome 90+% of the time? And data is actually quite simple. Like if you look at the patterns of any data company, there's really only like 3 stages, right? It's ingest stuff, source data, clean it up into a semantic model that is clean, that makes sense, presentation. And we had already nailed the presentation layer. And so then we started looking into the transformation layer. And, of course, there's always ambiguities. People always talk about like how cleaning data is hard and a pain, and that is true. And it is always like the anecdote that almost comes out of every data team, which is that you hire a set of people to spend 90% of their time on strategy. You end up spending 90% of your time on data plumbing, and then 10% of your time on strategy. That has also completely inverted now, where whether you're using dbt, whether you're using SQL mesh or whatever, its ability to produce SQL is like just phenomenal. And I would say, assuming that you can express your semantic layer, previously we had a structured way of expressing our semantic layer. Now we actually do it mostly unstructured, using text. But even with an unstructured text semantic layer, it does a pretty good job of cleaning stuff up, and it does also does a pretty good job of like asking for clarification when like some column is ambiguous. So Carl, which has been on many of these live streams, I asked him like in the last month, when's the last time you look at SQL? Because when in the retrofunding days, like a year ago, he probably spent every day in SQL and Python. in the last few months, he hasn't even looked at Python or SQL anymore because it's gotten so good. Then you go to the data ingestion, and that's that's a very constrained form of engineering, right? Like Claude Code, we know, is pretty good at a lot of different types of engineering. Ingestion is a very constrained form because there's only a handful of things that you're trying to do. You're trying to web scrape, you're trying to crawl an API, you have to, to rate limit, you have to paginate, type stuff like that. If you can build reasonable Rails, it does a pretty good job at that too. And so we've basically gone end to end with it. And then there's the question of like, what does it look like when you expose this to a person, like a non-technical person who, typically doesn't think in terms of how data pipes are plumbed. And that's incredibly empowering. Because if you think about a traditional, if you look at a traditional data team at any company, their job is to just answer questions left and right. So an executive or some strategic person might have a question of like, what's happening with my user base? And then they'll ask a data team to do it. And at first, I think the agent strategy was help these data engineers move faster. I think we're now at a point where I think we have the ability to build tools where non-technical people can just have conversations with data. And that is fundamentally different than thinking in terms of accelerating the engineering of a data piping and data plumbing and things like that. It's more like you can spend all your time on what are the questions that I care about, what are the strategic things that'll make a difference. If you care about growth, if you care about stability, if you care about security, whatever it is. And then the agents are good enough to just figure out the rest. Thankfully, we're in a space where this might be controversial, but data analysts are never been known for writing clean, high quality code. Like for the most part, people are very comfortable with messy spaghetti code. And so as long as it's producing the right answer and you have some way of tracking the data lineage, you can, for the most part, just let it go. So yeah, sorry, it's a long-winded answer, but I think it's not just about how data is supercharging data analytics for our internal operations. I think the entire industry is going to change very soon. I think the model of, oh, you have to hire like dedicated data teams to just focus on data cleaning, that model is going to change, and for the better. I think everybody has always wanted to spend more of their time on strategy, less of their time on plumbing. And so we are now at a point where that is true. And I think as an industry, we have to reckon with like, what does it look like when you actually do start spending your time that way?
Great, great. That was a great detailed insights. I personally have more questions on it, on how like AI would empower non-technical users in getting the right data, finding the right answers. So we'll get into that. But yeah, now coming to you, Adi. Can you talk about L2Beat? And specifically, L2Beat has so much data on it. I mean, any user who has visited the site, who has used it, knows that it is all data, like pure data site. So what's happening for you?
Yep. So outside it, we have two types of data. Maybe starting with the analytics. Outside it, the process there of obtaining this data changed significantly, as previously the way it worked. From my end, as a product manager, I would come up with some ideas and then ask engineers to do a proof of concept, and then there were a couple of iterations. But now, as a not so technical person, I'm able to do this myself. So I would say that we are using AI a lot for prototypes and experiments currently. And same applies to our research team. They have many great ideas of things to show, but then sometimes the way that they would express them was not ideal. So engineers were trying to come up with the thing that research wanted, but it was not always exactly that. So I think having the ability to prototype before something reaches the development has been amazing and has significantly sped up all the processes that we have. But then we still have to make these things maintainable. And I would say that that's what engineers are helping a lot with. Our engineers hate messy code, like they're not okay with things being messy. So we always go through this engineering review. And then on the presentation side of things, I think that still some kind of judgment is required to know what should be highlighted. You can show a lot of data, but then what is the insight that you want the user to get? But otherwise, if you have already the front-end components, AI has been great with just putting everything together into a chart or something else. But there is this other side of our work, the risk analysis, where I think AI has not been very helpful. Again, it has been helpful with mostly the coding part. So like if the researchers want to get specific on-chain value or make some small changes within our tooling, but then we cannot really trust AI with the risk summaries that we have on our page, or deciding on the stage that a project gets, because there are so many things that we take into account that I think AI often misses. And so then our research team is definitely needed. So yeah, I would say if I have to summarize, it has been mostly helpful with experiments and having something being 90% ready to be pushed to production, but then we still need the engineers, we still need the research team for the things that require judgment.
Sweet, thank you, Adi. I think this is also an interesting topic to touch on. I'd love to hear Toby's and Raymond's takes on the downsides as well, a little bit. You all briefly touched on it, but maybe Raymond, do you want to go first?
There are no downsides. No, I'm just kidding.
I was suspecting you were gonna say that.
There's a ton of downsides. Here's the biggest downside in my head is we are like, just think about the magnitude of this. We are with every new product release, with every new dependence. I don't know how much you guys live in Claude Code, but I spend every day in it, almost the entire day now. And what are the implications of that? There's two implications. One is we are feeding everything into a set of centralized, highly powerful, proprietary, completely closed behind closed doors, profit-oriented companies. It's not just the code that's going there. If it was just the code, that would be fine. But the way that we use it today, we are feeding everything strategic about every business that, like every business problem. And so to the extent that we're working in open data sets, maybe it's like less of an issue. We're just speeding them up because they could have done this themselves anyway. But if you look at the set of companies that are using it this way, they probably have internal strategy. They probably have internal spreadsheets. They have all sorts of proprietary data that shouldn't be going in there. They probably have all sorts of sensitive data that probably shouldn't be going in there. And we're just feeding it all into the same inference endpoints. It's not just the code. When it comes to data, it's every type of information about your business, about yourself, about your thoughts, about yeah. And so I think that is a huge systemic risk that we are just running towards right now. That is potentially the most dangerous form of centralization we've ever seen. Full stop. And as an industry here, as people that genuinely believe in decentralization and open principles, we're feeding into it as well. I think there's a serious conversation that needs to be had about how do we empower a more decentralized future when it comes to intelligence. And I know there are people that are working on it, like open weight models and open hardware, but in reality, I think the problem right now is that there is not enough effort and enough funds and enough people focusing on that, because we just looked into this probably last week. Like, to be able to run the most sophisticated models, to be able to be as effective and high velocity as everybody else, it takes hardware that we can't afford right now, quite frankly, right? And so there's something like, and hardware as a scarce resource, Bitcoin, we know what this looks like. We've explored these ideas before. We've just never really engaged with them intellectually in the way that we should have. So I think that, for one, is definitely the one that keeps me up at night. The other one that is related is, even if you were to start to build the data harness, which is what we're doing now, is like, we're building that data harness such that we can have more controls over information flow, right? Like using standard information flow control properties. So you make sure that, maybe it's generating code, but the data is running on your, hardware, and you kind of know it's helping you engineer something where you can monitor the flows and like the infill and the exfil of data at every single stage of your pipeline. Great. That would be ideal. The problem is right now that all of these harnesses, including Claude Code, are designed assuming you are feeding everything into an agent loop. Like, the agent does something, it calls a tool, you pass all that back to the agent, and then you iterate it again. Like the agent is the center of gravity, and every single harness is designed this way. So even if you were to fix the locality problem. So, okay, maybe I'm running on local hardware now. Maybe I am, maybe I have the hardware to run all of this locally, and I'm running my inference locally. Well, all of these models are trained with biases that you don't fully know how to inspect, nor do the people that created them know how to inspect. And we are increasingly running them with dangerously accept all edits, right? Because in a data universe, like it does so many steps that you can't sit there monitoring every single one of them. And increasingly, there is a UX problem where the bias, even with auto mode, is to just kind of like click through and say yes, yes, yes to everything. And so if these models are designed to write any kind of code that they want and behave however they want, and you don't know what their behavior is, and even if you were to run it locally, if you were to feed all the data into it, there is nothing to say that the agent isn't just going to do something nefarious with that data anyway, because the models are trained in a way that you don't fully understand. Most of these open weight models, for what it's worth, you don't have their training code, you don't have their training data. You don't know what is going into them. So just because they're open weight doesn't necessarily mean you understand how it's going to behave when it runs on your own hardware. And so not only is there a problem with the inference endpoints, there's a problem with the harness itself, because you're assuming that it's totally safe to just pipe everything into the core agent loop, and it's not going to do something nefarious with that data or pipe it out or exfil it in a way that you don't want. So when it comes to sensitive data, again, if it's public data, maybe you don't care, but increasingly we are all piping our sensitive data into it. And whether it's your own personal thoughts as an individual, whether you're a business with strategy that you don't want to get out, whether it's whatever it is, we're piping all of it in, and the entire architecture is designed for code. It is not designed for data. And if you start thinking about where can data start to leak out, you start to realize this is like, it's a pile of garbage. It's really bad situation that we're in.
Some fuel for the AI doomers there. But I had never thought about it. It's actually really interesting. I mean, scary as well, like how even if you run it on your own hardware, yeah, as you say, you don't know what how those harnesses were built. So really interesting. Thank you, Raymond. Let's go over to you, Toby. Any other points?
Yeah, I can only add to that. I mean, for us, I think, so I mentioned the labeling, right? That it makes our workflow much more efficient. But we don't, so we have basically a way to kind of semi-automatically label new contracts that come in, but we never obviously can kind of say, look, yeah, that's the final label. So we never actually submit that to the label pool straight away, right? So we have to kind of go through that again and really kind of double check, is that really correct? What, the first iteration basically, or what the first result was. And I think that's, for me, a major issue, that you actually don't know how many iterations you have to do to actually be correct with the result, with any data that we currently, or that kind of that we feed in, and kind of the result that we get out. Because I notice that myself when I sometimes, when I double check, and you really then it kind of starts to hallucinate in a way, because you had some some other contract that was something similar, but then you actually say, that cannot be, right? And then you really again need to look at it yourself. You need to go through all the the calls, the events, the the other contracts that contract interacted with, and so on. So I think that's the major issue, that we actually don't know when to stop controlling the AI or the results that we actually got. And it's a similar thing in the front end, right? I mean, we use it a lot now for front end development, obviously, because that's one of the most straightforward things. And also the thing that if it breaks one day, it's not a huge issue, right? If the data is incorrect, that's a huge issue. But if our front end for some reason kind of breaks, or like isn't as neat or neatly built and so on, that's not the biggest issue. And that I'm saying that as a product designer, right? I'd never want to see that, but I'm saying that it's okay. It's not a big issue. But even there, you see, like we have a GTP button component, for example, in our front end, and sometimes it still doesn't use, this component, and it comes up with a completely new thing, and it again kind of destroys our consistency throughout the platform. And that's just a tiny example in front end. And when you then kind of portray that to data, I think that's where you see you really kind of, you can't trust it so much still, right?
Makes sense. Thank you, Toby. Adi, you mentioned a couple points briefly in your previous answer, but did any of these answers spark any more thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, I think I agree with what Raymond said about the centralization and the bias. And I think that it's not only about the input data, but also its output. And something that directly affects us right now as L2Bit, especially after the recent hacks, is that there were so many new dashboards that popped up related to risk analysis, and a lot of them were vibe coded. And you could see that they were all providing similar analysis, similar insights, and some of it was even incorrect. And I think that's actually harmful in a way to the space, and overall decreases the trust in the space. And right now we as L2Bit are trying to, like previously we don't even had the idea of having an experimental kind of page that we clearly state includes vibe coded things, but then we thought, no, this is something that we cannot do because it affects the trust. And given the amount of vibe coded dashboards out there right now, we should try to make sure that our data and our research is as accurate as possible. And then I agree about the hallucination. I think that AI is sometimes very confident for some things, and it has even been the case that it cannot really point out the sources of this information. Sometimes when I'm talking and exploring new ideas, and it comes up with something, and I'm like, oh, this would be so cool, that's true, to show on our website. And then I start diving deeper, asking for sources, and they're nowhere to be found. Like I'm not even sure where this information is coming from. So yeah, there are definitely many downsides still. So I would say that people should be critical to its outputs.
Okay, great, Adi. So I had this question since a lot of you, all of us are dealing with on-chain data. A couple of years ago, I was working at an exchange, a centralized exchange, and we had the marketing team had a lot of questions for the data team of what are users trading, when are they trading. So questions which are, I would say, the data that is sensitive when it comes to centralized exchanges. But when it comes to on-chain data, a lot of it is already available publicly. So where do you see that using AI for on-chain data? Do you think it is more harmful or it is more helpful? And if it's helpful for you, where do you think it is being helpful right now at the current stage of AI? And like so, I'll ask this question to Adi, you first, and if you can answer that.
Yep. So I think, as already said, I think it applies mostly to the experiments that we are doing. Just writing the scripts to gather the data. But then I think that it's very important to try to get the data be as raw as possible. As if you ask a high level question, try to come up with some kind of insight. It will probably make its own assumptions and apply its own bias, and the data that you get won't be very objective. Might not be the complete data set. So this is something that I'm usually careful with. But otherwise, yeah, it has been very helpful with gathering the data. The thing is that it's always a concern at LTB, like how do we maintain this? It has not been that helpful there, and of course, we have to store the data. We have to make sure that all the insights that we have on our page can be pointed to actual on-chain data. So yeah, every time we're looking for the sources, looking for the raw data, and trying to make sure that there's no bias applied to that.
Okay. I have a follow-up question on that. I mean, I have that for you, Toby, that when it comes to on-chain data, we have also seen 2026 has been a year of hacks. Every month, there have been so many hacks. And most of I think people have been telling that so many of them have been because of social engineering. So do you see that data also plays some kind of role in that, where we can protect whether it's on-chain data or our personal data? What kind of data, specifically on-chain data, is it being used where for hackers to hack some kind of platforms or protocols? Um, yeah, how do you think it's being used by
I mean,
hackers?
definitely. I mean, like so much that I mentioned the label pool, right? And so much of the new contracts that we get in with a huge amount of daily active addresses, they are actually, like phishing contracts that kind of pretend to be a token they're not. So they actually, make people actually want to interact with. There's a new airdrop or distribution of, for example, on Polygon POS, the POL token, right? And if you actually look at the actual POL, the O is not an actual O; it's like another Unicode character, right? But a normal user would not actually identify it like that, and that's how this whole like social the hacking basically is put in place, and they do that for a long time. So I've just been actually labeling or looking at a couple of contracts like that. They had a lot of past activity at different points in time, and so they looked really legit. But when you then look deeper into it, what they actually do and like which tokens they then or like other contracts they interact with, then like you actually notice, okay, it's not a actual POL token or whatever it's supposed to be. And I think one of the things that what we also aim to do is with the Open Labels initiative, that we have an open label data set that can highlight exactly that, for example. Right now, we don't have a phishing tag, for example. But we actually want to add that to make people, or like any LLM, anyone basically interacting with contracts, more aware of, okay, what does this contract actually do and what is it? And if we identify it as a phishing or like spam or whatever it is much earlier and provide it in an open way, we can really prevent a lot of these things, a lot of the hacks, a lot of the insecure interaction with these contracts. And I think that's where, again, we need to push for open source data sets, right? Because if they only like closed source and if they're only available to someone that pays, the majority will not get it. The majority will not notice that this is not a good contract to interact with. So that highlights just how important it is to be very, very fast and open source with all these things.
Right, and that's very important actually topic. Vitalik talked about Crops AI earlier this year at Mumbai, and he mentioned how like data can be used for vulnerable things. So I have one more question, like which I had in the beginning about non-technical, how data can AI is useful for non-technical people. But before that, Nico, do you have any questions that you'd like to ask? So you can do that.
No, go ahead, Chandresh. I think that's an interesting
Um,
topic.
Great, great. But before I ask that question, so everyone who's watching us, listening to us, go to Epoch and vote for all the projects. You are already watching us. So this is the question for starting with Raymond. Like I want others to also pitch in is for non-technical users, like specifically related to your platform. How can they use AI? What kind of AI capabilities they have currently to create custom dashboards, to get some custom insights, get there, like how are you making it easier for non-technical users? So Raymond, yeah, for you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I was kind of highlighting the transition of how our product is moving, where non-technical people can start to ask the what and the why and less of the how. I think agents are pretty good at handling it. I think that is effectively what we're trying to do with OSO now. If you go to our website, oso.xyz, you can log in, you can create notebooks, you can start to have conversations with data. We are, in the next month, probably going to start to integrate with the data platform with more open-ended deep research agents. And so I think the whole premise of what we're trying to build on OSO to XYZ is to enable any non-technical user to just start having conversations with data and not worry at all about how the sausage is made. And I think that is incredibly powerful and empowering. I think there's a blog post that we either published or or is only in Google Doc form, about how we believe that open source principles is going to be an incredibly empowering. Like, there is a missing gap right now in applying open source principles to data. Data marketplaces are, for the most part, locked up behind very expensive, proprietary vendors like, the Snowflake marketplace or whatever. There are a handful of open source data sets. You can find some things on like Kaggle and Hugging Face, but there really isn't like, it's more tailored towards individual activities, like trying to run contests or things like that. We have yet to create the system for collective intelligence where we together can start to synthesize more broader open source knowledge and information and insights. I think that's a huge opportunity for us in the open source community to start to build towards, where we can start to collaborate on data sets, not just amongst people, which is the GitHub-y way of thinking, but with people and agents together, producing some of the highest quality open data sets that can exist. And so that's what we're building towards. Already, the platform is at a point where you can start to ask questions, ask it to index things for you, ask it to clean things up in a certain way, ask it to, parse these Google spreadsheets that you have and help answer questions about it. That kind of stuff is effectively already solved. Where we're trying to go next is, how do we take that basic primitive where agents can do the heavy lifting of the how? You can focus, the human beings can focus on the what and the why, like what are the questions that are worth answering, and then how do we do that in a collaborative way, in the same, with the same open source principles that we've come to expect when we collaborate on GitHub, when we collaborate through package managers like npm or PyPy. How can we create an ecosystem and a network of people and agents producing interesting knowledge together? I think that is very underexplored, and we're super excited to empower not just developers, which I feel like that's been a limitation. Like the thing that Claude Code did for GitHub was open up coding to non-technical people. We have yet to see that type of unlock happen in a more broad data sense. And so we're excited to kind of push forward a thesis of how we think that might look like. And we encourage people to come take a look and work with us on that.
Well, this answer was very exciting for all the OS Observer users. I mean, you talked that how you gave so many details. So now also Adi, for you, how do you think non-technical users can benefit from AI on L2B?
Yeah, so first of all, I think that maybe non-technical would soon be obsolete, as I was also a non-technical person myself, not so interested in coding, but now everything's possible. I think as L2B, what we're focusing on is providing accurate data, so then you as a user can derive all kinds of different insights. And I think that if you provide bad data, you'll probably get a better response. So that's what we'll try to do. We also have tooling that can be used to understand how a system works on chain. So I'm sure that if you run this locally and then provide the output to an agent, it would be able to provide you a summary of this system. That's what we use for our L2's assessment. And I'm sure that it can be applied to any kind of project. I think some projects are already using it. So yeah, I think that we focus on providing accurate data and tools that will help you see what's happening on chain, and then you can plug in your agent and try to get the insights that you'd like.
Okay, great. And Toby, for you, I've already been finding it useful, by the way, like I mentioned at the beginning of this call. But yeah, you can highlight more things that users like me can do on Grow the Pie.
Yeah, specifically for non-technical users, I mean, we've always been pushing that side of things as well. I mean, we're catering towards developers, but also like we always wanted to make it easy for everyone to kind of interact with data or really discover things. And what we lately did specifically for AI, because you see a user behavior that is now more moving towards chat, right? Or has moved towards chat. So like we all know, like we go less and less on actual websites and kind of look for things ourselves, but rather we kind of put that question into Claude or open ChatGPT and so on, and kind of start there. And that's why. And so docs grow the pie. When you specifically then ask, for example, in Claude, and use our API to kind of find the latest apps, for example, that have been deployed or came to the ecosystem in the last week or so, then you can really get it hands-on from the data that we have. So I think that's for non-technical user the easiest way to start and to explore more and more around data, whatever it is. Be it like, I don't know, what's the latest trending L2 in terms of, or the stablecoin market cap, or like which L2 makes the most profit, or which app has the most activity lately based on transaction count or multiple a combination of different metrics. So I think that all works when you specifically tell any AI or LLM to use the tools and the different API endpoints that we have.
Okay.
Well, thank you all.
You.
We are coming to the end of the live stream. The time has gone really fast. I think it's a fascinating topic we could be talking about for hours. But yeah, for the sake of time, I would love to ask you what's the future for your projects? How does it look like? And related to the current funding round, what's what's the use of the funds that you would receive from Epoch 12, and what exciting things are coming for your projects? Adi, let's start with you.
Sure. I think at L2Beat, we'll aim going forward to extend our scope beyond L2s and support protocols where the crops principles matter. We'll also cover them from a crops perspective. And any data that is relevant to these protocols we'll provide. And I think that it's important for a company like ours to stay neutral and unbiased, and that's only possible thanks to the support we receive from the community. And that's what the Octant funding allows us to do. So yeah, please support us. We appreciate every donation. And we'll provide all the data that we have. Our code is open source, all the tooling you could use for your own purposes. So yeah, thank you for supporting us so far, and please continue to do so.
Thank you, Adi. Yeah, amazing work you guys are doing at L2Beat. I loved hearing that you're evolving from the L2 police to the crops police. I think that's a awesome growth phase for you. So excited to see all that. Raymond, what about you?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I definitely want to say is huge thank you to the Octant community. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for you guys. We're proud members of this community, proud members of the public goods community. I hate to say it, but through these markets, we've seen plenty of our peers disappear, and we're really grateful to be here. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I would say, and it relates to AI, and it relates to AI and funding, is that, yes, AI. I can see two versions of the world. One is with AI, as the cost of producing software shrinks, right? It never goes to zero, but there's some like the cost of producing software is decreasing over time. You can have two versions of the world. One is where you start laying people off because you don't need as many people to do the same things, or the other option is that you get to be more ambitious and try to build towards the world that you want to see. And I would argue we are very far from the world that we want to see. We've identified a lot of problems when it comes to data and privacy. And then in a world of AI and how current harnesses handle data and privacy, there's just, and the current centralization risk, there is so much at stake that we need to be much more ambitious in what we do with these funds. And so, our version of that is, I think as I've mentioned, just to build on my answer from before, I think there is a huge opportunity here to change how data works with open source principles, especially as agents democratize the ability for anybody to produce code, anybody to produce data pipelines. The human beings should and can always stay around in the data world to help us shape what are the answers that are most important. What are the answers that are most important to advancing our society, advancing our democracy, advancing, our collective well-being? What are the important questions? Those are meant for humans to decide. And we're excited to build this platform, extend on the platform, extend on all the things that we did to try to build this collective intelligence platform. I think, if Dune is the best that we have, which I love those guys, they've done incredible work, then I don't think we're being ambitious enough, right? It can't just be, first of all, it needs to be open source. So like I think that goes without saying in this community. But second of all, it can't just be the presentation layer. As I mentioned, data follows a very simple pattern. It's ingest, transform, presentation. And if we're only collaborating on the presentation layer, we are missing out on a huge opportunity for us to work together to build much better data sets, much better collective knowledge. And so we're excited to kind of extend our platform to build that in an agent native way, hopefully with safe harnesses and safe guardrails. That's kind of what we're working towards right now. And we want to work with this community to build the best open source data sets that are out there, because I think we can't just stop with on-chain blockchain data. I think what should be obvious is that it on-chain data is only a subset of the data that make these communities great, right? Which is why we started monitoring things like GitHub, and we started monitoring software supply chains, and we started monitoring funding data. There's all sorts of things that make this community amazing, and we want to work together with you guys in making that public. So yeah, learn more. Feel free to reach out anytime. Want to collaborate with all y'all.
Awesome work. Thank you, Raymond. And it's been awesome also to see you guys evolve also like with AI. I haven't seen the latest, so I'm after this live stream, I'm gonna run there and check it out, because it's been amazing to see all your evolution really. So congrats for that. And yeah, you have OSO in the Epoch 12 page to vote for. Toby, let's go over to you.
Yes, I can only double down on what Raymond said. So Octant has been very, very important to us as for the growth of growthepie. Like in the last 2.5, 3 years, whenever we basically entered Epoch 3, that was unexpected, the result back then as well. But like throughout the epochs, I think it was great to see that we have so many people that also kind of support us and want to see more what we've been doing. And so yeah, that's why we keep pushing. And really for us, as I also said, like it's always been exploring different use cases apart from the things that we already have, but already showing what the great things that we have in terms of apps in the ecosystem. And I think that's what we are, where we are pushing more and more as well, to make it more discoverable, and to help developers also explore new use cases that have not been explored, because we still believe that it's not just institutions that want to use blockchain, but there's so much more that we can actually use it for, and that we can also bring in new users. So, for example, one of the things that we've been exploring now is creating an iOS app that is kind of experimenting with a new target group, let's say, where we don't have just the OGs, or the crypto people that are more technical or that have been there for a long time. But I think what we need to do, especially in the next wave of hopefully users coming in, to show them what is out there and what are the benefits. Right? As simple as okay, why would you use Aave? Right? Why is it such a successful app in the ecosystem? And that's what we want to do more and more. And obviously kind of have it more AI enabled, because as I said, user behavior has changed, and we have to adapt as well as a product. So yeah, and so again, thanks for all your support as well, like the Octant team, like organizing all of this, pushing so much there, all the events, all the live streams that you do. And yeah, this all the great projects as I think great honor. And
Sweet, thank you, Toby. And yeah, we've come to the end of the live stream. It's been super cool hearing all your takes on this as data experts with amazing data platforms. So yeah, go to our audience. Thank you as well for coming here to watch this, and go to Octant app and check out these amazing projects. Vote for them. As you know, you don't need to have GLM locked for a long time. You can do direct ETH donations, so anyone can support. And well, these are amazing projects to do so. Yeah, thank you also, Chandresh, for being a great co-host. Do you want to say some final words before we wrap up?
Yeah, yeah. This was beautiful, and by the way, I'm loving Octant V2. It's I know I was using V1, and you have to lock the GLM and wait, and so this is amazing for both. I think me as a donor, that I don't have to think too much, and I can vote whenever a new info comes in, even if I have not locked GLM. And obviously, great, a big win for all the amazing projects. By the way, I think to all the listeners, I've never seen a bad project on Octant. So go vote for all of them. Yeah, that's it.
Sweet. Thank you, Chandresh. Thank you, Adi, Raymond, and Toby for being great guests as well. And thank you to our audience who was watching. And I'll see you tomorrow for another live stream at the same time. And yeah, go to Octant.app and vote for these amazing projects. Thank you all, and have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.